Hi, welcome to what is left of the Sommer Academy on the Hohen Salzburg in Salzburg on the Fortress from this year. I was part of the Pendant course, so Pendant by Svenja Deininger. She was the course leader. This was actually a painter's residency, but my works were somewhat different. Most of my colleagues were working in the studio, and I was spending most of the time outside. So what you see here is actually a whole series of walls that have been put up for the purpose of structure and simplicity. Our course leader decided to have every one of us, and each and every one of us, pair two pieces. So the idea was to have two works that in one way or another were related to each other or were a direct response to any other work, even a text. And so what I did, collecting a series of dusts and surface patinas around Salzburg, I brought together a scan of the city, which you see over here on the left. I'll get back to explaining the wall structure in a second, but up until very recently I was surrounded by my works were surrounded by many others, so I was given the separate wall to the back. In the corner to the far right of this screen where you have the window, that was my studio space. So we'll walk there in a second so I can show you what my view was whilst I was working indoors. So you have a series of dust collections on the left, and then on the right I put up a map, more or less a map. It's a panorama after Sattler, who was from Salzburg. He made many panoramas, not just of his hometown. And you can see from here there's a few white dots, and they correspond to the dust on the left. So I'll take you around the corner now. We'll first take a look out of the window so you can see what the panorama by Sattler directly connects to. So here you have a part of Salzburger Land. Unfortunately there's scaffolding, so the view is not entirely unobscured, but we're lucky because it's not raining as it used to these days. Right, and so this was basically the space, fancy working space. There you go. Light tends to be better in the afternoons. Let's go back to the works. So we just saw the real panorama, and we're going back to the virtual one. I'll just take you around the pillar over here. You can see the back of the walls as well, not too exciting, and there you go. So we just looked out of the window and had a view of more or less this area over here. So this is the panorama from the Panorama Museum, actually. And as I said, the white dots that you see here correspond to the material gathered here. It's a series of, well, all kinds of places, but it includes moss, it includes leaves and petals, also material from various stages around Salzburg. Let me just take you back to the dots, and I'll walk you or talk you through where I actually went. I'll try and keep this brief because otherwise we'll be here forever. So the outlier over here, this dot, that shows you Castle Hellbrunn, and I went there specifically to film a bit of footage, but really to get the dust of the Sound of Music pavilion, so the pavilion where the iconic song 16 going on 17 was shot. And so that dot over here corresponds to this collection over here. I put them in photo albums, so there's also this idea of collecting memory that is personal, but also one that resonates with the wider public, which was more or less the main aim of this pairing here. So I'm showing various views of Salzburg based on world literature, music, of course. Salzburg as a city was Mozart's hometown, and then I embedded all the other stories I could in the 2 weeks that I was here, that also emphasized the overlayering of history, especially in relation to National Socialism. So I'll elaborate on that in a second, but back to the dots here. Schloss Hellbrunn is the outlier, and I also went to this place over here, just behind this lovely lake. That is Schloss Leopoldskron, and it was home to the co-founder of the Salzburger Festspiele, Max Reinhardt, who then had to leave. He was of Jewish origin, so he had to leave Austria and died in exile in 1943 in New York. And today that castle there is a hotel. And I snuck in when they were holding a wedding reception in order to access what used to be his library. So that space, the books are gone, but the space corresponds to this collection over here. And you can see there's random hair, certainly not Max Reinhardt's, but it gives you this sense again of how a place continues to be inhabited regardless of its past. Or perhaps this detail is not uninteresting. It shows you a piece of wood from the parquet of the library. So perhaps something that Reinhardt himself once stood on. So what is interesting also is this interplay between, or the idea or question, when does a souvenir become a relic, and vice versa. I was trying to explore a bit of this as well, because various histories mean different things to each and every one of us. So that is also why the photo album is an apt choice for presentation. All right, so we've looked at the two outliers and we're zooming in on the city center, Salzburg. I'll just talk you through them. This one over here, at the time that Sattler painted the panorama, didn't exist. The sound that you hear is bells and something else, not usually what you associate with Salzburg. Anyways, this spot over here is today the Felsenreich-Schule, a place where various important and famous names were connected. Some of that ranges from Luciano Pavarotti to Arturo Toscanini, but also, of course, Max Reinhardt, and many others. This place over here, the Kollegienkirche, is sometimes also used as a performance venue during the Festspiele. Then over here, this dot marks a gallery that you can't see from here, but it's the Galerie Welz. The Galerie Welz during World War II was relatively well off, selling artworks that were taken and confiscated, and were dealing with them over several decades, even after the war. And so that's really the perfect example of cases of restitution in Austria when it comes to looted property during World War II. Something a bit merrier in content is this dot over here. It marks the Abbey of St. Peter's and its bakery. So I went there to collect crumbs. They do the best brioche in town. Actually, it's some of the best brioche I've ever had. And that corresponds to this. So it's, of all my pieces, the lightest colored one. From the Abbey, let's move on to the other side of the Salzach. By the way, this is the river that runs through Salzburg, and it's called the Salzach, and this is where it heads towards. There we go, back to the window. So on the other side of the Salzach, we have the large Kapuzinerberg over here. And this dot represents a specific house in the Steingasse, which is an old street in Salzburg. It stretches from here more or less all the way to there. And this part today shows you a house that in World War II was damaged when an American tank rolled through and it tore off part of the wall. And the bare wall that there is today is covered partly in moss, and I tried to get all of that moss off, and that's what I got. So in a way, this is the remnant of World War II. As I said, it could be even considered a souvenir by some. To others, it's a good example of how the Allied forces did more damage than others may expect. So, right, and perhaps I'll show you this one last dot over here. So a side note, it's not been stuck right here, which is the villa that Stefan Zweig lived in, his last home in Austria before he emigrated to Brazil via London and then took his life in Brazil. I wrote a letter asking for access to that house to incorporate it in this project, but it was never answered, so that's perhaps quite telling. And so instead I made do with this location here, which today holds a Mozart bust. But really what stood there up until 1948 was the hut in which Mozart composed the magic flute, so the so-called Zauberflötenhäuschen. And that was moved because it was too damaged, so for conservation purposes it was taken down, and now it's in the gardens of the Mozarteum University in Salzburg. So I went and basically traced the place where once that house stood, and this is what it amounts to. So given that it's in nature, it was convenient because there was plenty of moss around as well. Right, let me just zoom out again, so I hope you now have a better picture of the project. I'm sorry for this out of focus mode. I will try and get it in focus again. There we go. Right, so this is my version of the pendant made for the course. My other colleagues painted with acrylics and oil, whereas I use my medium, that's the lint roller, and to me the pigment for a painter is the dust or the wooden patina or the crumbs or whatever comes off. Oh, there's one thing I forgot I need to show you, because there's one photograph, or the fragment of a photograph that I stuck in, and it's this one over here. So what you see on this side shows you various stages in the Felsenreitschule, which is why you get some sequins and feathers. So I like to think that I was cleaning up after Papageno. And here, this top part is still part of the Felsenreitschule. The bottom part is the foyer of the performance venue, so that's where ladies and gentlemen before, after and during performances in the breaks get their drinks. And that's the reason why I stuck in this photograph here. It's a cutout of a picture showing three men that used to be very close. They were good friends. They all worked with their hands. This man's hand over here, that's Arturo Toscanini, so the conductor. And in the middle, linking arms with him, is Bruno Walter, who wrote the biography on Gustav Mahler. And to the far right, this hand over here, also it says right hand, and I don't think he was left-handed, that is Stefan Zweig's hand. So to me, this picture was symbolic for capturing an era that then completely fell apart and was impossible to reconstruct. So that was it. And it explains, so that fragment, including Stefan Zweig's hand, explains why I also, let me walk you back to it, I also put up one separate album as an invitation to jump over this hurdle here to make a connection to my wall, because I remind you that that space as it is now was not empty, so one needed to understand how to get from here to my works over there. So as an invitation, I put up this piece, which is just a collage, and it shows you a small cutout from the Sattler panorama, but really I wanted to put in another reference to Zweig, and this is something that's interesting. It says leave notice, which is very telling, of course, because he would leave and not come back to Salzburg, right? And he also had written a piece of which I put in a copy over here, Reisen oder gereist sein. So Zweig the Cosmopolitan, writing on traveling and having traveled, right? So that's more or less it. I'm finishing off here, otherwise this is never ending. Sorry for the constant out of focus, but I think you've got a good view of it all now. I hope you enjoyed this, and I can only recommend you to come over here during the Festspiele if you have a moment, because the Summer Academy really is a great place. Oh yeah, that is the residue of my work anyway. So this was me zooming in, and hope to see you one day here or in another exhibition of mine. Bye.